Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, helping you to find jargon-free information before choosing a professional to help solve your problems and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And during this segment of the show, I'm very happy that we finally have Divorce Mediator Laurie Grover, who is the owner at RI Divorce Mediation Center. That's in Rhode Island, Cranston, Rhode Island. And yeah, we can't wait for her to come onto the show because she's here to talk about a very interesting topic. Laurie's topic for today is personality disorders in divorce. So, if you are one of the increasing numbers of people seeking professional guidance in the Cranston, Rhode Island area, and yeah, you feel that today's topic is something that you can relate to, then you may just want to stop what you're doing, log out of Facebook, Twitter, stop the Instagramming, or anything else you happen to be doing which may cause a distraction. And I've got a feeling it may be worth your time just to grab a notepad and pen and get ready to take some copious notes as we listen in to what Laurie has to share with us today. So with that said, let's not keep her waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Laurie.
Hello, Stuart. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome, my dear. I'm so glad that you found the time out of your busy schedule to come and speak with us today. Before we start with our first question, Laurie, there's a little bit of housekeeping that we need to do here. I need to make it absolutely clear that anything you share with us today is not legal advice or legal assistance. It's purely for the purpose of sharing information. Now, would you just care to expand on that in your own words, Laurie, so that everybody's clear about what we're doing today?
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to the area of divorce and understanding the laws, obviously they're different for everyone, regardless of where you live. Each state has the ability and to kind of draft their own laws and regulations about divorce. But what I wanted to basically do today, because I think it's a growing issue in divorce cases, is provide a foundation of understanding for people who may be dealing with a side of divorce that isn't as much legal as it is practical. And how do you start a divorce with someone who you think may have a personality disorder or maybe a high conflict personality? And so you're right, this is not legal advice. This is more a foundation for maybe having some validation in what you've been thinking, or wondering, gee, my spouse keeps doing this and I think I'm crazy. Well, no, you're not crazy. So today we're just going to give you some helpful information.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us, Laurie. So now that you've set the tone for the remainder of our conversation today, tell us a little bit about Rhode Island Divorce Mediation Center and the people who you serve, as well as the kinds of situations they find themselves in when they come to you for your help.
Well, the Mediation Center was started by me. I'm almost in my 12th year, and it was born out of my own divorce experience. Not that it was an awful divorce, but there were a lot of mistakes that I made, and I really felt as though what I learned obligated me to share what I had learned and the mistakes that I made with other couples and families divorcing, and hopefully help them make better choices than I did and come out with better outcomes. Most of the people that we work with, generally speaking, are looking for a non-adversarial, more amicable and personal way to end their marriage without the damage of litigation and the expense of litigation as well. That's the general types of people that we see come through our doors. Relating to the topic of today, when we start getting into disordered or high conflict personalities, a lot of these spouses don't know what to do. They're very fearful. They may have gotten advice that's either scared them or seems a little off to them, and they're looking for guidance and safety and security. So we're usually a call on their list to help them carve a path out for beginning the process.
Okay, Laurie. So, with that said, then, for those people who are out there and, yeah, they're finding themselves in that unfortunate position where they're facing divorce or considering divorce, or maybe they're right in the middle of it or have even gone through divorce, what are the advantages of being able to recognize personality disorders either in themselves or even in their partners?
I think the most important thing in recognizing that something's wrong is it should alter the approach that you take. The one thing that is consistent with personality disorders is that they usually, aggressive situations will trigger certain feelings and behaviors and conduct from high conflict or disordered personalities. And unfortunately, when you move into litigation where it's incredibly aggressive and it's more of a win-lose environment, that environment triggers these personalities into those behaviors intensifying, those feelings intensifying. So it actually, in most cases, makes the cases worse. And that's probably one of the biggest downfalls of a litigated situation with high conflict cases. But I want to be clear that not all high conflict cases can be conducted and resolved through mediation. There are some cases where it can't be done that way. But I always encourage people to explore the use of mediation, even if it is in conjunction with attorneys, because it can be a much more personalized and softer approach, especially if you have a professionally trained and skilled mediator in this area.
Right. So I could only imagine then, Laurie, especially with this topic today, personality disorders in divorce, that there's lots of different kinds of information out there. People go online, they do some research, and they find things which they believe to be true. So my question to you is, what do you feel are some of the biggest myths out there when it comes to personality disorders in divorce?
The biggest one, I would have to say, is the false perception that is often given by the legal community and legal professionals, where using aggression is going to be part of the strategy and that somehow that's going to work. You know, as I mentioned earlier, when met with aggression, these personalities will ramp up their fear and aggression as well. So, you know, much of the advice that a lot of people get with a spouse who maybe even friends and family have witnessed this behavior from their friend's spouse, and they'll say, you need to hire, a pit bull lawyer, some of the terminology that's used out there, or someone really aggressive. That isn't the answer, because what's going to happen is that aggressive lawyer is going to posture the way they normally do. The personality disorder individual is going to be triggered. They're going to start doing their thing. They're also going to go out and hire an aggressive lawyer, and basically you've started a cycle. And unfortunately, the spiral on that cycle is down. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Aggression is really not always the answer. And I would say the second one is thinking that you do not need to prepare for a high conflict divorce differently than a regular divorce. These divorces require a tremendous amount of pre-paving, if you will, and pre-planning before, if possible, if you're the one that's going to be initiating the divorce, before you even say that word to your spouse or bring it up. Because many things can happen that I wish we had more time today, but the high conflict personality, knowing this is coming, can start doing a lot of things that will make the process a lot more difficult. So planning is also incredibly important.
Okay, so those are a couple of myths, misconceptions about personality disorders. But when it comes to your actual industry then, Laurie, what are one or two misconceptions surrounding your industry? Please share that with us.
There are a number of them. And it's funny because some of them are actually opposing. There are some people who believe that mediation is only for couples who get along and have agreed on everything. There are others who think that mediation is only for people who can't get along. And then the last misconception, which is probably the biggest one, is there are a number of people, although mediation has become much more widely accepted and people understand it better, but there are still a lot of people that believe that a good mediator is also an attorney. And actually the opposite is true. Most people think that mediation is just an extension of the law, and it isn't. So though either of those three things are usually, when we get calls in to the office, those are the three things that we will typically get questioned on.
Okay, Laurie, so you've obviously helped quite a lot of people throughout your career. So when you think about those clients that you work with on a day-to-day basis, what are some of their most common fears surrounding today's topic?
There's a fear of the outcome in general because there's so much uncertainty. There is a fear of what the future will look like and either how high the conflict will get or if and when it will ever end. And the third, I would say, is the impact this will have on couples who have children.
And how can they get past those fears then, Laurie?
The key, it's hard when you are in a relationship with a disordered personality. Fear is something that becomes a part of your life. And it's your companion. And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, even in the midst of feeling like you have some footing and you're taking all the right steps, that fear is not something that easily is erased. It takes time to come down off of that fear and get your life back on track and feel as though you have some power back. Those who are listening will probably know what I'm describing. As the daughter of a mother with narcissistic personality disorder, I have a very intimate understanding of the fear and how people feel, spouses of disordered personalities feel when they're facing something like this. It's incredibly challenging.
So switching gears a little bit then, Laurie, what other perceived obstacles do you see that might be preventing people from seeking the help of a divorce mediator?
I think that the perception may be that mediation isn't a good fit if you have a high conflict or disordered spouse. And as I mentioned earlier, in some cases that may be true. But my rule of thumb for anyone that I speak with is if your spouse is not someone who has a history of physical abuse, then it may be worth it for you to try getting through the mediation process, seeking out someone who is actually qualified and has worked with these cases specifically. But as they say, you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because a lot of times the skill of a mediator can be incredibly powerful working through these delicate and sometimes contentious cases. So it can be as much of a win-win as possible, considering what you're dealing with.
So as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is divorce mediator Laurie Grover, owner of RI, that's in Rhode Island, Divorce Mediation Center. Now, her topic for today is personality disorders in divorce, and she's done a fantastic job of covering the questions that I've posed so far. However, with that topic in mind, Laurie, and for those people who are out there in the Cranston, Rhode Island area listening in right now, please share, one or two of the common mistakes that they need to be aware of when they're around somebody who may have a personality disorder.
Expect the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
These types of individuals are very unpredictable. As a matter of fact, I like to say that they are predictably unpredictable. And that when the divorce is either coming to fruition, regardless of who initiates it, things are probably going to get worse before they get better. One of the things that I tell people is if your high conflict spouse initiates the divorce, it's going to be your fault. If you initiate the divorce, it's going to be your fault. Mm-hmm. Anything that was ever your fault is still going to be your fault. And that's just one of the unfortunate realities of these personalities. So your goal is to prepare yourself. And that's one of the reasons why preparation is a huge piece of what I try to educate people about. As a matter of fact, I am currently putting the finishing touches on an online course specifically for high conflict personality disorders and divorce, so that people can learn how to screen for the professionals, the things they need to know, how to protect themselves, how to protect their children. Because it's once you walk through that door and the divorce is imminent, it's kind of like all the rules don't apply anymore, and you just have to expect anything.
So you shared so much great stuff today, Laurie. You've spoken about some of the myths that are out there and the misconceptions, and also some of the pitfalls that people need to be aware of. So based on everything what you've shared with us so far, and obviously keeping your client's confidentiality in mind, please share an example of how you've helped someone to, overcome those obstacles that you've been speaking about today, and what kind of results you have been able to gain for them or would be able to gain for them.
The thing that is most important, I believe, is my understanding, my intimate and personal understanding of these disorders because of my own experience with them. The golden rule with these cases is that no two are ever going to be alike. So generally speaking, when I do work with these cases, which, by the way, I want to be clear, is on a case-by-case basis, and I do interview before I will agree to take these cases. But essentially, it is a softer, gentler, nuanced approach that if you're going to be successful with these cases, there has to be some gaining of trust in understanding and, to some degree, testing what the boundaries of the high conflict personality is, and not pushing them to where they're feeling backed up against a wall or ganged up on. They need to be part of the conversation and feel as though they are participating in their divorce. But a good mediator, and what I try to do is, what every mediator should do is, your mediator is kind of running the show, and it's the mediator's job to manage the interactions, manage the tone, manage the type of, and reframe the kinds of conversations to try to keep them as productive and constructive as possible. So, it's a great question you asked. I wish I had that little magic potion in a vial that I could pull out for these clients and everybody would have a great result, but it's because every personality is different. It requires just that skill and that nuance of understanding what are the personality's tolerances, and how can you work with them. So there's so much thinking and skill that goes into mediating these cases.
Certainly not something that's just black and white, right?
Not at all.
Right. So when you think about all of the people who you've helped then throughout your career, Laurie, on a deep down personal level, what do you get from that? How does it make you feel?
It's incredibly rewarding. I think that those of us who take on certain professions, I think therapists are what I would put in the same bucket with me. We are all looking to help people through difficult journeys that we have all traveled. Those of us who have made it out on the other side, relatively unscathed, like to give back. And that's really a big part of it for me personally. I was fortunate as a child because I did have some good, solid and loving extended family that helped mitigate my mother's disordered personality. But I still went home every night, and I was still subjected to her behavior and everything that went along with it. So the children of these personalities, of these families, are also critically important to me because they need an advocate as well. And as with any divorce, if you make the parents okay or as okay as possible, the children are going to be the biggest winners in that. So when I do take these cases, and even, any case, even if they don't have disorders, because of my own divorce, because of where I've come from, it's very personal for me, and I want to see people be able to get back on their feet and go on to live lives without dragging their divorces with them into their future and having their children become statistics. There is a better way, and I try to make that happen in my office for couples every day.
You know something, Laurie, I'm so glad you brought up the point about the children. It's something that I call the invisible victims. The whole reason for me doing this particular series, Let's Talk Divorce, is because I'm a child of divorce myself. And as a young 9-year-old boy, I experienced a very volatile, a very violent, a very bloody divorce between my parents. And, I'm 55 years old now as you and I speak. So that was, we're talking about the mid 70s, late 70s. And the resources that are available to people now were non-existent back in those days. So I didn't have the capabilities, the resources to be able to deal with that, and ended up carrying the guilt of my parents' breakup and carried that through my young teenage years, into my young adult years. And it took me a long time, self-reflection, speaking with professionals like yourself, to be able to develop the tools to cope with that, even though it still rears its ugly head. But the negative impact that had of experiencing such a situation where there was so much conflict, I've never been able to put that into words. And the reason why we're doing this show is that we have experts like you come onto this show and share your insights, the fantastic kind of insights that you've been sharing so far today, in the hope that any of our listeners who do find themselves in that situation where there is conflict look at things from a different perspective and put their children first. Because as I always say, love your children more than you hate yourselves at this particular moment in your lives. And you may have every reason to be at each other's throats, but the children must come first. I'm so, so glad that you brought up that point about those invisible voices out there, because what we're doing here is hopefully indirectly through the show and through the exposure, we're going to help them. So thank you for that, Laurie.
Absolutely.
So while we're still on this topic and talking about you, share a little bit about your backstory then, Laurie. What led you down this, let's say this winding path to where you are today? How did you get started? What inspired you?
It was my own divorce, which, as I mentioned earlier, it was not awful, but there were enough mistakes that were made that certainly contributed to a much more prolonged recovery than I should have had. And I also saw the impact of the legal system on my daughter. At the time of my divorce, which was back in the 90s, mediation had not made its way to the East Coast from California, as with many things, as is the case with many. But I felt as though once I got my sea legs back and I was on my feet, I felt almost obligated to step up and do something that would impact people going through this more positively. So I had a lot of people that were encouraging me to go to law school, and I thought, gee, that would make me just one more part of the problem. I'm sorry if there's any lawyers listening out there. Forgive me. But I didn't want to be a part of the problem. And my second husband, I had remarried at this point, and he said, why don't you think about mediation? And he's actually the one that encouraged me. And I did. And it appealed to me on a lot of levels because it was based on needs and best interests. And families were not case numbers. And it was a thoughtful, respectful process that focused on helping rebuild people's lives instead of gauging or judging them on who's a better parent or who should get 51%. So that's what led me to the path of becoming a divorce mediator. The personality disorder piece of the practice actually began emerging about 1.5 to 2 years ago, because I've seen a slow but steady increase in the number of disordered personalities that I'm working with. And I also saw that, I kind of look at, you might be able to relate to this if you remember and you think about how bullying was a few years ago, where, we kind of looked at it as a product of poor parenting. We wanted to throw it back on the parents. But bullying now has become a lot more focused on and seen for what it is. And now we have anti-bullying campaigns. There's much more awareness of it. And I feel, honestly, when I look at where personality disorders are right now, because close to 10% of the population has some sort of a personality disorder, then those are big numbers. This topic is where bullying was a few years ago. And I felt as though I wanted to, again, be an asset to people who were going through this and didn't have anywhere to turn and needed some solid guidance and some good direction that wasn't attached to the legal system. So, and it's part of why my practice is constantly growing and evolving, because I believe, as with what I do in my profession, I should be serving the needs of what the population needs from me. So, I've added this in. I will be adding some other things in relating to the children in the future, but this is all about giving back based on the experience that I've had, and I feel incredibly blessed to have been able to come through it stronger and much wiser. So it's paying it forward.
Laurie, let me ask you this then. When you think about the people who you help, then, Laurie, what's the most important question they should be thinking about? Yeah, let me put it this way. What's the most important question they should be thinking about as they consider today's topic of personality disorders in divorce?
How do I need to prepare for what's coming? Preparation is everything. And it's like building a house. You don't hang curtains when you don't have a roof. And you don't buy doorknobs before you have a foundation. It's not only in these high conflict cases, people in general, by the time they reach the point where they feel their marriage is over, most people, I hear this all the time, they'd really like to just get it over with, understandably. But that's where the mistakes are made. When you have a high conflict or disordered personalities in a divorce, again, they're not thinking about the outcome. They're not thinking about their well-being. They're thinking about survival. They're thinking about inflicting pain. They're thinking about their wounds. So someone going into a divorce with a spouse like this is their head's reeling from, well, how am I going to live and what's going to happen to the house and what about the kids and how are we going to handle this and that? It's the complete opposite of what their disordered spouse is thinking. So it's incredibly important to be grounded from the beginning and to start preparing. Because what's going to happen, and just let me explain why that's so important. Once the divorce blossoms, whether it's someone files their case or someone says the D word, it's going to blow up. There's going to be some chaos. You're going to be more in damage control mode than you are anything else. So for anyone who's listening who understands what it's like to be triggered by their spouse, the last thing you're able to do is really think rationally when your spouse is triggering you. So that's where the preparation gets lost. So if you're able to, and you can lay this foundation as best you can down ahead of time, then a move is made in the perfect world, obviously, but that's the route you want to go, because then once the chaos ramps up, you've got some plans already laid, and you've plotted a little bit of a course, even if it's an outline, you have direction. So if you leave yourself vulnerable to trying to deal with these things once the horse is out of the barn, as they say, it's going to make it more difficult. It's going to be more stressful. Your decisions aren't necessarily going to be as clear or as good as they could have been had you taken a little time to prepare ahead of time. That advice to anyone is gold. And that's, again, through my own personal experience of learning how to deal with, manage my mother's personality. That's how you have to handle these types of situations.
So if I'm a person who's listening in right now, Laurie, or sometime in the future, as this show will be online, and just like you mentioned the bullying movement before and the timing of where we are right now in terms of personality disorders in divorce, if I want to get involved, if I want to help to push that ball forward, raise more awareness, what would I do? Where would I go?
The first thing I would suggest is that we all take a little bit of a step back when we talk about what the term narcissism means, because it's one of those terms that is beginning to get thrown around somewhat casually as someone maybe who is overly confident or has a selfie stick in their trunk all the time or posts a lot on Facebook, and that there may be some narcissism in there, but I think awareness and getting comfortable and understanding what do these terms mean and what exactly is a personality disorder versus someone who may not actually have the disorder but is on the spectrum. So we have to learn how to frame the conversation properly before we can have the conversation. So I think it's on us, just as a society, to perhaps be a little bit more diligent in how we use terms and how we understand them, because it could really make a difference in how we relate with someone or the kind of advice you give them. So self-education is, I think, important. One of the parts of the question you asked was, what if you think you're a narcissist? There are some online quizzes that you can take, believe it or not, that will put you on a scale and tell you where you fall on the healthy narcissism spectrum versus when it might be getting into more of the disorder. You can also work with a therapist if you suspect that maybe there are some things in your life that you're not real comfortable with, or that you're not real happy and you don't understand why you're having trouble with relationships. Reach out to a therapist who has familiarity with these disorders that may be able to help you sort things out. And if you have a disordered spouse, or you think you do, that's your biggest go-to, is finding a therapist who will be able to educate you and help you understand and possibly even manage your spouse's behavior. Because with certain disorders, there can also be safety concerns that I need to make sure that we bring into this conversation. Someone who is just, someone who is maybe just may have an inflated ego and likes to brag, or is just kind of absent as a partner, is entirely different than someone who is abusive, or maybe even sliding onto the sociopathic scale. So professional guidance in this area is incredibly important, which is also why, if you're divorcing, the professionals that you bring on your team to work with you also need to be knowledgeable about what kind of a spouse you have. So you notice it's all really education, taking some personal responsibility, speaking properly about what are we witnessing and what are we seeing, having that conversation.
That's actually a good segue into my next question, Laurie, before we close out and get your contact details. What's the most important thing that, for those people who are out there seeking professional guidance, what's the most important thing they should consider when evaluating a divorce mediator?
Couple of things. One is the training of the mediator. One of the downfalls, depending on which side of the argument you're on, one of the downfalls of the mediation profession is that there are no requirements or licensing that's required. So on one side, that's good, because we don't really know who would license or regulate this other than attorneys, which want to take somewhat of a view where mediation is an extension of the law, which it really isn't. The fact that the industry is unregulated means that the consumer needs to do a little bit more homework and understand what a mediator really is and who qualifies as one. When I was researching the profession, there were many 40-hour courses that were available, and even some colleges offered, 30-hour training courses, and I did not see that as something that was enough of an education personally, but I also felt that wasn't going to give me the credibility that I was looking for. So I actually graduated from Lakewood College, who was nationally accredited, and that was only one of two courses that they offered was mediation training. So, you need to do some homework if you're looking for a mediator, and you want to ask about their training. They should have had more than a 40-hour training course. They need to, I'm nationally certified also. I hang my hat on that. I think it's important to the credibility. Also know that someone who is an attorney doesn't automatically make them qualified to be a mediator. There are certain skills, managing conflict skills and people and psychology skills that go into being a good mediator, that if you think about attorneys and what they do, they are trained and skilled in arguing, where mediators are more trained and skilled in reducing conflict. So the two don't meet up. So, it's just a matter of, if you're going to invest in a divorce, then I say this to people: you're going to get out of it exactly what you put into it. If you're going to put a new tire on your car and you're not planning on buying another one for 10 years, don't buy a cheap tire. You want a tire that's going to last. It all comes down to qualifying the people that you're working with and just making sure that they align with your goals and what you want to see happen. There's so much responsibility that comes along with getting divorced. People say to me all the time, wasn't this hard to get married? And, they're right, because there's a lot more when you're dissolving a marriage from a legal perspective. But I say to people, look at it this way. When you're going into your divorce, you put a certain amount of effort into planning your wedding because however elaborate or simple it was, you still needed a preacher to be there. You still needed food to eat. You still wanted to dance. You put effort into your marriage so that it would give you something. You need to do the same thing with your divorce. You need to put the effort into the divorce that's going to give you the result you're looking for. And the ultimate result that everyone should be looking for is a fair, sustainable, balanced agreement that they can live with that does not leave them emotionally or financially broken.
Wow, this is just so many great insights today. So interesting talking with you, Laurie. Unfortunately, we are coming towards the end of the show. So if there is somebody who feels they need to know more about personality disorders in divorce or anything else that's related to divorce mediation, how can they connect with you? What's the easiest way?
So we have a couple of options. Our website is RI Divorce Mediation Center.com, and that's all one word. We also have a company Facebook page, and we certainly encourage anyone, if they have questions, to feel free to call us. And our office number is 401-228-8789.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a blast today. We have been listening to divorce mediator Laurie Grover. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Laurie. You have certainly demonstrated that you are a true educator, advocate, and helpful advisor for your client's success. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you for allowing me to shed light on such an important topic. It's been my pleasure.
You are so welcome, my dear. And I'd also just like to take a quick moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, to all those people listening in the Cranston, Rhode Island area. Thank you for joining us on this very insightful and informative discussion with one of the leading divorce mediators in Cranston, Rhode Island today. Again, her name is Laurie Grover. Make sure you do check her out. Give her a call. Visit her website. There are some great resources on there. And you know something? After listening to Laurie today, whatever you decide to do, I'm absolutely convinced that you're going to be in a great place to get started. So that's it for today, folks. Again, my name is Stuart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.